Welcome to In Your Neighborhood. I'm your host, Chris O'Rourke. We're coming to you from the Hopewell Park in Mahoning Township, Montour County. I'm on one of a series of mountain biking trails that opened during a big year for one local organization.
2015 was a big year for the Montour Area Recreation Commission. It took a huge leap forward on its North Branch Canal Trail, opening the first 0.4 of a mile. And then it stepped up to the plate to take on the Herculean task of keeping the Montour Preserve open. It also opened part of the new mountain biking trail system at Hopewell Park. So much happened that an even bigger milestone was nearly lost in the shuffle. 2015 also was the year that Marc turned 10 years old. This year promises to be just as big for two of those spots. Marc hopes to open the entire 6.2-mile stretch of the North Branch Canal Trail by next month, and with the deadline on a decision looming, Pennsylvania stepped forward to give $200,000 to keep the Montour Preserve open even longer. The canal trail has been 14 years in the making, and by 2011, all the initial groundwork was done, and Marc had to finish a survey, the subdivision, and get all the permits needed to make it happen.
Well, in 2013 we had almost all the go-ahead, but then we had a legal issue with one of the adjacent landowners who claimed that he and his wife owned part of the land. We had to work through that. By the end of 2014, we had all the permits in place and there were no challenges at that point in time. So if I recall correctly, December of 2014, we had some of our first work crews out to start doing the vegetation clearing. And then throughout 2015, from essentially January 1 on, we worked on clearing the vegetation and all the woody debris on 6.2 miles of trail corridor. And by the point of last September, we had the first 0.4 of a mile done and graded, done to the point where we were ready to open it up to the public. So,
walking the trail, you get a sense of the blood, sweat, tears, and broken chainsaws that went into clearing it. Stout says that dozens, if not hundreds of volunteers helped out, from Service First to FNB employees to local Boy Scout troops in Geisinger's emergency department. Much of what was holding up the completion of the trail to Catawissa on this day were the 18 breaks along it. You come to the first one just past the 0.4 of a mile marker, a 20-foot deep ravine.
this is where, as of today, you have to stop, you have to do your turn and come back. If you look behind us here, we have the better part of a 20-foot drop into this stream channel here. This is an area where our volunteers just weren't able to do this. We need to find some way to safely cross this. As we worked with the engineer and the others, it came down to we need a major culvert here. And if you look over my right shoulder, we have a 6-foot diameter pipe, 30-foot long, that has to get put into location back behind us here. So thanks to the help of the North Shore Railroad, they came out with train equipment and they transported the pipes to our locations for us. They set them off right next to where we need to put them in. We've also got the services now of Earthwork Services LLC out of Danville. They were our low bidder for the project. They're going to be out here in the next few days and the next few weeks with mini excavators, skid steers, and other equipment. They'll drag the pipe into location, and then when they do, they'll cut the tow path from where we're standing right here. It will ramp down, go across the culvert pipe, and ramp back up the other side. And at that point, once they clear about the next 1 to 2/10 of a mile, then we have the better part of 3 miles immediately is done and open to the public. And as we do those at other locations out through here, pretty quickly the full 6.2 miles will come online then. So again, if it wasn't for the North Shore Railroad, if it wasn't for the CDCOG Joint Rail Authority who was willing to transfer the land to us in the first place, not for the Susquehanna Greenway Partnership and all these other partners that have come on board, not the least of which is the Williams Transatlantic Pipeline Company in partnership with the Conservation Fund. They provided the grant funding to us last year and this year that allowed us to buy the pipes, to get the construction equipment, to get the labor to get this all done.
The large pipe that will be used to fill in much of this gap sits just off to the side and easily fits the entire stout brood. While pipes like this one will be used to fill 14 of the breaks, 2 bridges will have to be built. The day we were out, a crew was just wrapping up work on one of them, a 12-foot long span. Another 50-foot bridge hadn't been built yet. But even on this day, only walking 0.4 of a mile, you could see the potential this trail has. And it turns out, many people have made the same discovery.
Well, we've already had issues where the trail's been used so heavy this spring that it's killed the grass in some places where we'll have to come in and reseed it. I've been real pleased. It exceeded my expectations in terms of people who would use it, even though it's only the first 0.4 of a mile. But if you look behind us, or if you look down the trail corridor, it's gorgeous. There's wildflowers everywhere, there's waterfowl, there's just beautiful scenery, and it's a different trail than you get at Hessfield or even the Montour Preserve or elsewhere. Having the river in the background with the canal just on the other side is really a unique experience. And unlike some other trails, again, it's a grass mowed surface trail, and it's deliberately done that way to minimize the environmental impact on the river and on the wetlands that are nearby. Most trails today have to be built to be ADA compliant, where it's a stable, firm, slip-resistant surface that is universally accessible. But because of the conditions we had along here, this is more of a natural, primitive type trail, and it's neat, and a lot of people like that aspect of it.
This trail will someday connect with other existing ones and segments that are coming online each day, all along the Susquehanna River from Maryland to New York State, where the river gets its start just down the street from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Stout says the Susquehanna Greenway Partnership has the regional vision to decide how to connect all of the disjointed pieces into a trail that promotes the river towns along it with health and wellness and any potential academic activities. The Montour Preserve covers nearly 700 acres in northern Montour County. It was established back in the early 70s by what was then PP&L. A few years ago, PPL merged with another company, and that new company that was the result, Talon Energy, announced back in 2014 that the preserve wouldn't offer any more educational programming and would likely close. Stout and his organization soon found themselves in a terrifyingly daunting position. They were considered the lead agency to save it.
And we realized, boy, there is nobody else stepping forward to do this. Even though we're small and we don't necessarily have the capacity to do this, if we don't, nobody else is coming forward to do it. We implored different state agencies, other regional organizations, national conservation organizations, anybody that we could think of. We reached out to them and said, isn't there some way you can help save the Montour Preserve? And to a group, they said, look, we don't have the capacity ourselves, nor do we see how we're going to get the funding to make this happen. We wish you all the best. We'll write a strongly worded letter of support, but you guys are the lead agency on the ground. You were the best bet.
Stout says after waiting for the cavalry to arrive, they soon realized they were the cavalry. Marc was able to negotiate a deal where they took over the operation and maintenance of the preserve, but to seal the deal, Talon wanted to see commitment in the form of $100,000, the expected cost to keep it open for a year, to be raised by the end of July of 2015. You responded, and Marc hit that mark, and also was able to raise $61,000 through May of this year for next year, before the Commonwealth pitched in $200,000. Keeping an eye on the bottom line is a basic necessity of any organization, but that yearly operations and maintenance cost for the preserve has placed Stout in a position that he's not truly accustomed to, as a fundraiser.
How has that been for you?
It's the part of the job that nobody really enjoys, because you're essentially the beggar in chief all the time. If somebody sees you coming in the door, more often than not, they pretend that they're on the phone or they know that Montour Rec is out there consistently, either trying to raise money for the Montour Preserve or the North Branch Canal Trail Project or the mountain bike trails at Hopewell Park or Hessfield.
He says the greatest possible scenario would be for an individual or family to leave a legacy for Montour County in the form of an endowment fund for outdoor recreation. Until that time, Marc will keep the preserve up and running and holding programs like the very popular maple sugaring that is held at the end of February each year. Couple that with the trails and the lake, and you have a location that is still very popular.
Oh, tremendous use. When we were doing the budgeting ahead of time, I thought perhaps we'd bring in $3,000 in pavilion reservations over the course of the year, being relatively cautious in my estimates of how many people would reserve the pavilions. I think realistically we'll be at $4,500 to $5,000 in pavilion reservations alone. Through June and July, if you look at the calendar, most pavilions are rented every Saturday and Sunday. The use has been tremendous. We were out there on Memorial Day weekend. I went out each and every day that weekend just to see how things were going. and it was so busy all weekend long. I spent a lot more time than I planned on emptying the trash and restocking the restrooms and doing everything else. We filled a dumpster just that weekend alone in amount of use. There were hundreds of people there at any one time, easily 1,000 to 2,000 people there over the course of the weekend. There were dozens of kayaks, small fishing boats. There were people using the trails, people having picnics, people in the visitor center. The demand is there, there's no doubt about it. And it's just a matter of how do we find the funding that we need to continue to provide this resource.
The preserve is one of 7 parks or trail sites that Marc manages in Columbia and Montour counties, and Stout tells us that people come to them all the time asking if more can be added to one of the parks or if a certain piece of land could become a park. He points to this as evidence of the growing demand for recreation in the region. But in the next breath he says that the issue all comes back to funding, and that the Montour County Commissioners can only do so much to help, typically earmarking hotel tax dollars for Marc. Stout says there's almost no limit to the things they can do, if only they could find the funding to make it happen.
The other aspect of Marc is the Rivertowns Race Series, and while they've had as many as 17 races in the past and as few as 6, they recently boosted that number back to 11 to raise funds for the Montour Preserve. When we come back, we'll take you to a very noisy event that draws thousands to our area with the goal of shooting this tiny orange disc out of the sky.